Right now it's 2017, the current year as some may call it. It's not just 2017 though, it's December 2017, and in a few days, depending on when you're watching this, it'll be 2018. You're probably confused as to why I'm telling you things a kindergartner could have figured out, but there's something significant about that date. 1999 ended 18 years ago, and by the end of this month, everyone born in the 90s will be a legal adult. People who were young children in the late 90s and early 2000s have been in the workforce for several years now, and they've been using their money to vote in the great marketplace of ideas. The result of this is obviously more media companies bringing back their franchises from the 90s and 2000s. And out of all those that seems to be the most interested in nostalgia territory seems to be Nickelodeon. They've announced 3 new straight-to-video movies, all based off properties from the mid-90s or early 2000s, and all based on series that ended abruptly or left the fans wanting more. Invader Zim, Rocko's Modern Life, and the first of these 3 movies to be released, Hey Arnold, the Jungle Movie. The Jungle Movie isn't actually a new idea, it's actually the completed version of the planned series finale film from the early 2000s. It was scrapped due to a combination of poor sales from the first Hey Arnold film and Craig Bartlett leaving Nickelodeon, but interest in the unreleased film from 90s Kids Online made it an obvious choice for Nick in their plans to revisit their franchises. While it's clear that there's no shortage of people who grew up with the series that eagerly awaited a conclusion to it, the question to ask is it a really good idea to make one? We've all heard of these rose-colored glasses that come with nostalgia, but another side effect of it is the identity. We see more people willing to put their money in things just because they fit the persona of the 90s kid. People who mistake a time period with a personality. In that marketplace of ideas, millennials and Generation Z are kind of like its equivalent to the people of Walmart. Obsessing over the specific 10 years or so you were born might bring you attention from people like you. It gets the completely opposite type of attention from the outside world. As I said, it's December 2017. It's been 14 years since Hey Arnold stopped airing new episodes, and the world is vastly different than it was in 2004. And what counts as good media is also going to be different too. While something can age well or age poorly, a new Hey Arnold movie has to simultaneously live up to the original and not be dated even if the original might be. It's a new movie after all, it shouldn't have aged poorly because it hasn't aged at all. Can this be done with something like Hey Arnold? Well, if you want to ask if an Arnold reboot works, you have to understand what made things in the original work in the late 90s and early 2000s. That time period isn't my strong suit, I mostly just stick to the now. If we're looking at something from the 2000s, we need an expert in the field. Luckily, I know a guy.
When I was a little kid, I thought Stewie Griffin and Arnold were related. Wonder if they're the same person. But hey, that's just a theory. Again. But in all seriousness, Hey Arnold was kind of a dramatic shift in tone when it came out in 1996. The creator, Craig Bartlett, worked more in experimental animation than cartooning, and in fact, the character of Arnold was adapted from the penny shorts he created for Pee-wee's Playhouse. His vision for the series was to make a Charlie Brown for the 90s, which explains certain elements like the ensemble cast in the urban setting. It doesn't seem like a lot now, but for 1996, this was pretty revolutionary. Hey Arnold was only the 6th Nicktoon, and the first to start human characters. And no, the Rugrats aren't human, those are reptilian Klasky Chupo demons and they secretly control the universe. Don't let them fool you. The consequence of all this was that Hey Arnold was more real than any of the other cartoons on TV at the time. You could see the imperfections of the city and the people within it. If you ever look at one of those compilations of jokes we didn't get as kids, then you'll notice a lot of people put Hey Arnold on there. Particularly characters like Miriam Pataki, who was always an implied alcoholic, but never explicitly one. This was actually mostly by design. While censorship is always a factor, Hey Arnold kept its characters obscured by choice, to represent the kind of sketchy characters you'd see growing up in a city. It's one of the first cartoons to explore the gray area between being bad and being good, and how you can't easily define one person as being either extreme. As Vox puts it, it's a world that is neither picture-perfect nor dystopian, but simply, and honestly, flawed. The first Hey Arnold movie dropped in 2002, just before the series ended. While it didn't have the best reception upon release, it served its purpose in furthering the characters along, and it reflected the themes that had been with the series since its inception. It ended on a bittersweet note, showing that, while the town was saved and the characters will stay with us, they're bound to change, just like we all are. It cemented a legacy, and in order to live up to that legacy, a new Hey Arnold movie would have to expand on that. It needs to show character growth while at the same time keeping the characters real, reflecting the real situations they were bred from and the real emotions they feel, even when it isn't happiness. The Jungle Movie was Nick's attempt at that, so I'll pass the mic back to Bruce so he can talk about it and see if it lives up to that legacy.
The Jungle movie was originally planned in the late 90s along with Arnold Saves the Neighborhood, but morphed into what's now known as the series finale, The Journal. Arnold's story was explored in this episode, but like a lot of the things in the series, it never got a proper conclusion due to the cancellation and Craig Bartlett leaving Nickelodeon. News of the unfinished Jungle movie's existence was spread via interviews and conversations in animation fan circles, and people writing and petitioning Nickelodeon for its release finally pushed it into seeing an actual release date. Hey Arnold, the Jungle movie follows the story of Arnold and his classmates as they visit the Central American country of San Lorenzo. Arnold's goal from this trip is to find his parents as they went missing in the country of San Lorenzo a decade prior. The cast joins up with a former friend of Arnold's parents, and after Arnold is given an artifact that belonged to the Green-Eyed People, a tribe his parents try to save, he sets out to find their land and restore it to health, and with any luck, find his parents there too.
She swallow, I'm loading these hollows. She like taking footballs, call that bitch Hey Arnold.
The animation in Hey Arnold has always been very crisp and detailed, and the film brings this to a whole new level. The movement is very smooth, and in some parts, better than the original series. The series definitely benefits from the graphics and art technology that we have today. You can especially see how great the animation is in the action and fight scenes. The sequences are fast-paced and quite a lot goes on in them. So it's quite evident to see how much work and dedication the staff had to go through to make all of this possible.
It's true. The technological difference between the 90s and 2017 shows up in the movie in a lot of noticeable ways. One thing that looks really nice are the hand-painted backgrounds. Seeing them in HD is a really pleasant experience. They look so much nicer than I'd have ever imagined. I'd be lying if I said every decision they make works though. An example being the CGI segments in the film, such as the Temple of the Green-Eyed People. I'm sure it's more practical to use 3D models today than it was in the 90s, but in this case, they really should have just stuck to what they knew.
Even if you are not acquainted with Hey Arnold, the film gives a basic understanding of what is going on and what Arnold's motivations are. You might not have seen every episode of the series, but you can still gather that Arnold's parents were a big part of his personality, and this was true in the original series, especially in the later seasons. With the story, the scenes have good pacing and never overstay their welcome, keeping the viewer on the tip of their toes for most of it. However, a lot of the plot felt very predictable. We'll elaborate more on this in the spoilers section, but quite a few of the twists and turns felt bare, especially with the unmasking of the villain. I was waiting thinking, oh yeah, that's the bad guy, big surprise. Of course, this is a minor qualm, but it does make the film a little less exciting if you're watching it on its own without any prior connection to its series.
One thing I was really happy with is how late 90s the humor was. It's hard to really explain what that means, but it's always more absurdist than random. One character this really shines through with is the pig, Abner. I won't spoil the jokes with him, but just about every scene he's in, especially with the plane, are fantastic.
It's very interesting how the crew went out of their way to make the characters accurate to their established personalities. As an example, Arnold is just as helpful to others in the movie as in the original series. It's also very interesting to see how the writers use the characters in the jungle setting of San Lorenzo. It lends itself to jokes about the location and the characters' interactions in that setting. I especially like the use of Arnold's grandparents, Pokey and Phil. Every scene they were in, they just put a smile on my To get back on my earlier point on the predictability of the film, it's important to discuss the character of Eduardo, or rather his imposter. It was kind of obvious that the character La Sombra was disguised as the actual Eduardo. To be honest, I was waiting for La Sombra to reveal himself and get it over with. That was really my only gripe about the film.
The foreshadowing was probably the best aspect in the entire film. The running gags weren't just for comedy. They contributed to the story in a major way. The character Brainy in the series was always used as a punching bag for Helga after making some sort of affectionate monologue. But in the film, after Helga rips up her locket of Arnold, Brainy throws himself into the river. At first, I thought this was a callback to the original joke, but this would actually come into play when Brainy brings Helga back to heart, which would lead to it being the replacement for Le Corazon. Scenes like this show that the writers really wanted to call back to what was great and funny about the original series, and it definitely helped set the mood for the conclusion.
One more thing I'd like to add before we move on, but I'm honestly glad that Arnold's parents move in with Arnold at the end of the special. While it did feel rushed, it felt nice to conclude with the fact that Arnold achieved his lifelong goal of reuniting with his parents while staying in the city with his friends. Because of that, Hey Arnold finally received a satisfying ending 15 years after its last episode. Hey Arnold, the Jungle Movie is a pretty good film on its own, but a great conclusion to the original series. It's funny, heartwarming, and good-natured all around. It finally resolves a lot of the loose threads in a way that few cartoons really get to, and at the same time it leaves a lot of room open for interpretation. Even if the series has a conclusion, you can still go and show it to someone new today and they can probably get as much out of it as the people watching it live did. One thing that's kind of interesting is that there has been talk of season 6 of Hey Arnold, and while I'd imagine Craig Bartlett might be burnt out on this character for the moment, you could totally continue producing the series, and even with the existence of the Jungle Movie, it'd work just as well.
Given the renewed interest in the series and Nickelodeon's recent reboot kick, I think it's finally possible that Craig might actually revisit one of the other Hey Arnold projects from the 2000s. One infamously cancelled piece of adult animation was Nick at Night's series The Patakis, an Arnold spin-off centering around Helga's apathetic family. In the original, it was kinda clear that Bob and Miriam had some very adult trouble going on behind the scenes. It was avant-garde stuff for the 2000s, and maybe it was a bit too far ahead of its time. 2017 though, we've seen a lot of successful adult animated series that touch on some really sad, down-to-earth subjects. Maybe The Patakis could earn its spot on the mantle that shows like BoJack Horseman and F is for Family sit on. It's a long shot perhaps, but just a few years ago we accepted the Jungle Movie as just another example of lost media, and now look at it. Of course, Nickelodeon may never revisit the series after this. It's all just speculation. But hey, even in the worst case scenario, we can say that the original Hey Arnold series got the send-off it deserved, and that's something to really appreciate.
Before we sign off, I want to mention the motivations of this film coming to fruition. In the credits of the Jungle Movie, the last thing that is said is, "Thank you to the fans who wrote letters and signed petitions encouraging the making of this movie. In the eyes of the staff, we were the reason that any of this was fulfilled." And that is a sign that fan involvement can mean something in the long term. While nostalgia can cloud one's judgment of what was good and what was bad about a series, there's no denying that in this example, there was legitimate appreciation rather than blind love of the 90s that brought the Jungle Movie to life. As not only did Nickelodeon agree with its fans, but they put out a great movie because of it. For people who grew up in the late 90s or 2000s, this has been a great successful transition in the marketplace of ideas.
Hey, I'm Felix Hart. This video is part of a collaboration with my series Running in the Thousands, where I talk about stuff released after 2000 and how it's impacted the world today, for better or worse. I haven't been keeping up with it a lot lately thanks to my real life job, so if you like what you see on my channel, consider pledging to my Patreon. Even a small contribution means that I can spend more time focusing on the series.
Hey bros, I'd like to give a special thanks to Felix for dedicating a lot of his time to help write and also edit this video. His channel deserves more attention, so please show him some support. Before I go, I'd like to announce some exciting news about the new reboot of my podcast, the SnoopCast. I'd like to announce that we have made a Twitter for announcements of future episodes, topics, and announcements for what we have also planned. I recently updated my dormant Patreon into the brand new SnoopCast Patreon. With this, viewers will be able to contribute to the show, greatly influencing the future endeavors we'd like to take the show in. You'll also receive some behind-the-scenes perks in contributing to topics and other assorted goodies. That's all I have to say, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in 2018.